The crystal ballroom of the Metropolitan Tower gleamed with golden light from its signature Art Deco chandeliers, each fixture worth more than most people's cars and casting intricate shadows across the polished marble floors. Dad had spared no expense for his 60th birthday celebration, transforming the city's most prestigious event space into something worthy of a royal reception. White roses cascaded from towering centerpieces at every table, and a live jazz quartet played sophisticated melodies that floated through conversations peppered with the confident laughter of the city's elite. I stood quietly near the massive windows that offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline 30 floors below, watching the celebration unfold around me like a scene from a movie I wasn't really part of. The guest list read like a who's who of the metropolitan area's most successful residents, prominent attorneys, influential politicians, wealthy real estate developers, and old money families whose names appeared on hospital wings and university buildings. Dad commanded the center of attention in his custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly styled and his confident smile reflecting the satisfaction of a man who had built an empire from nothing. At 60, Vincent Castellano still possessed the kind of magnetic presence that made other powerful men seek his counsel. And tonight, surrounded by congratulations and admiration from 200 of his closest associates, he was absolutely in his element. 40 years in commercial real estate, he was saying to a circle of admirers, his voice carrying the authority that comes from closing billion-dollar deals. And I can tell you that success isn't about luck or timing. It's about vision, execution, and surrounding yourself with people who understand what it takes to build something lasting. My stepmother Patricia stood beside him like a perfectly polished accessory, radiant in her champagne silk gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments. At 45, she had the kind of beauty that required significant investment to maintain, and every detail of her appearance, from her diamond necklace to her professionally styled hair, announced her status as the wife of one of the city's most successful men. My older half-brother Marcus dominated the conversation from Dad's right side, his voice carrying the confidence that comes from being groomed as the heir to a commercial real estate empire. At 28, he had already closed several major deals independently, and his success was evident in everything from his platinum cufflinks to the way other young professionals sought his attention. The Morrison Tower project brought in $12 million in commissions this quarter, Marcus announced, adjusting his Patek Philippe watch with practiced casualness. Sometimes I look at what we've accomplished and realize that most people simply don't have the intelligence or drive to operate at this level. His wife Sophia nodded enthusiastically, her designer dress and flawless makeup serving as testament to the lifestyle that Marcus's success provided. Exactly. It takes a special kind of vision to see opportunities that others miss. Not everyone can think on that scale. I continued sipping my champagne, Dom Perignon naturally because Dad never settled for anything less than the finest, and let their familiar boasts wash over me like expensive background music. They had no idea that the simple black cocktail dress I was wearing had been custom designed by the same fashion house that dressed tech moguls and hedge fund managers, or that the understated pearl earrings I wore were worth more than Marcus's monthly salary. Speaking of vision and long-term thinking, Dad's voice grew louder as he addressed the broader gathering. I want to take a moment to talk about legacy and what it means to build something meaningful that can be passed down through generations. The conversations around us quieted as Dad's authoritative voice commanded attention from across the elegant ballroom. Other guests turned their chairs to better observe the man whose success they all admired and hoped to emulate. When I started Castellano Properties 40 years ago, Dad continued, his tone taking on the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to addressing shareholders and industry conferences, I made a commitment not just to building wealth, but to creating a dynasty that would endure for generations. I wanted to establish something that my children could be proud of, something they could build upon. Patricia beamed at him with practiced adoration, her smile perfectly calculated to convey both love and pride without appearing too eager for the spotlight. Looking at Marcus, Dad went on, his pride evident in every word, I see that vision fulfilled. He's not just following in my footsteps, he's expanding our reach, innovating our approach, and preparing to take Castellano Properties to even greater heights. Marcus straightened in his custom-tailored suit, clearly basking in the public acknowledgement of his achievements. Sophia squeezed his hand, her expression radiating the satisfaction that comes from being married to the family's golden child. Then Dad's gaze found me across the crowded ballroom, and I felt the familiar weight of his disappointment settling over the celebration like an expensive but suffocating blanket. "And then there's Natalie," he said, his tone shifting subtly but unmistakably, the warmth draining from his voice like wine from a broken glass. "My biological daughter, who at 26 continues to disappoint me with her lack of direction and her complete inability to understand what it means to be a Castellano." The words cut through the elegant atmosphere like a knife through silk, sharp and impossible to ignore. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes turning toward me, some sympathetic, others curious, a few probably grateful that their own family disappointments weren't being aired quite so publicly at such a prestigious event. "Natalie refuses to join the family business," Dad continued, his voice carrying across the ballroom with the authority that made him one of the city's most respected businessmen. "She lives in some tiny apartment downtown, drives a car that's older than some of our junior employees, and works on what she calls investment projects that no one in this room would consider serious business ventures." I could hear the soft murmur of conversations starting around the room as guests processed this unexpected turn in what was supposed to be a celebration. Patricia's expression remained perfectly composed, but I caught the flash of satisfaction in her eyes. She had always enjoyed these moments when Dad's disappointment in me became public knowledge. "I've offered her every opportunity," Dad pressed on, apparently committed to making his disappointment a centerpiece of the evening's entertainment. "Entry-level positions at the company, introductions to serious professionals, even funding for legitimate business ventures. But she insists on pursuing these fantasy projects that will never amount to anything meaningful." Marcus nodded approvingly, clearly enjoying his role as the successful son in contrast to my apparent failures. "The real estate industry requires vision, capital, and professional connections," he added, his voice loud enough for several nearby tables to hear. "It's not something you can just dabble in as a hobby." I set down my champagne flute and walked calmly toward the family's table, my heels clicking softly against the marble floor. The conversations around us grew quieter as people sensed that something significant was about to happen. "Dad," I said quietly, my voice carrying clearly in the sudden hush, "I think there might be some misunderstanding about my work." He turned toward me with the kind of expression that successful men reserve for interruptions they consider unwelcome. "Natalie, please don't embarrass yourself further by trying to defend whatever it is you think you've accomplished. This is my birthday celebration, and I won't have it disrupted by your delusions of success." "I'm not here to disrupt anything," I replied calmly. "I just thought you might be interested to know that your daughter has been somewhat more successful than you realize." Dad's laugh was sharp and dismissive, the sound carrying across the ballroom like broken crystal. "Success? Natalie, you live in a studio apartment and drive a Honda that should have been scrapped years ago. That's not success, that's barely survival." The circle of guests around us had grown larger, drawn by the increasingly public nature of our family drama. I could see several prominent businesspeople in the crowd, including some whose names I recognized from the Forbes list of the city's most successful entrepreneurs. "Actually," I said, reaching into my purse and pulling out my phone, "I think there might be some confusion about my living situation and business ventures." Dad's expression shifted from annoyance to something approaching anger. "Natalie, I am not going to stand here at my own birthday party and listen to more of your fantasies about being a successful businesswoman. You're embarrassing yourself and this entire family." That's when he made the decision that would change everything. "Security," Dad called out, his voice booming across the elegant ballroom and drawing the attention of every guest in the room. "Security, remove my daughter from this event. She's disrupting the celebration and I want her escorted from the building immediately." The room fell completely silent except for the soft jazz music that continued playing, apparently unaware that the evening had taken such a dramatic turn. 200 of the city's most influential people watched as a uniformed security guard approached our table, his expression professional but clearly uncomfortable with the family drama he was being asked to manage. The security guard, a tall, well-dressed man who looked like he'd been working high-end events for years, walked directly toward me, his steps measured and polite. But as he got closer, his expression changed from professional courtesy to something approaching confusion. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, stopping just short of our table and speaking in a voice that carried clearly across the silent ballroom. "Are you Ms. Natalie Castellano?" "I am," I replied calmly. The security guard's entire demeanor shifted, his professional composure giving way to something that looked almost like deference. "Ma'am, I'm very sorry for the confusion, but you're the building owner. You're listed as the primary contact for all security matters in the Metropolitan Tower." The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the distant hum of the building's climate control system, the soft whisper of expensive fabric as people shifted in their seats, the barely audible sound of champagne bubbles rising in crystal glasses. Dad's face went from confident to confused to something approaching horror in the span of about 3 seconds. "What did you just say?" The security guard looked around the room, clearly realizing that he had just delivered information that was having a much more dramatic impact than he had anticipated. "Sir, Ms. Castellano owns the Metropolitan Tower. She purchased the building 18 months ago through her investment company, Meridian Holdings." "That's impossible," Dad whispered, his voice barely audible even in the complete silence of the ballroom. I pulled out my phone and opened the property management app that controlled every aspect of the building's operations. "Actually, Dad, it's quite true. I bought the Metropolitan Tower for $247 million in cash 18 months ago when the previous owners were facing bankruptcy." The number hung in the air like a revelation. $247 million. More money than most of the people in this room would see in their lifetimes, and I had used it as a single real estate transaction. "The Metropolitan Tower is part of my commercial real estate portfolio," I continued, showing Dad the screen that displayed my property holdings. "I own 12 commercial buildings across the city, including 3 of the properties that Castellano Properties manages for other investors." Marcus was staring at my phone screen, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. That shows a portfolio worth over $400 million. $437 million to be precise," I confirmed. "Though that's just the real estate holdings. The total investment portfolio is somewhat larger." Patricia had gone completely pale, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the shock that was written across her features. "How is this possible? You're 26 years old." "I started investing when I was 18, I explained, addressing the entire ballroom since everyone was clearly listening anyway. "I began with the trust fund that Grandma Castellano left me, $2 million that I used to buy my first property downtown. I've been building the portfolio ever since, reinvesting all profits and leveraging my existing holdings to acquire larger properties." Dad found his voice, though it came out rough with disbelief. "You bought the Metropolitan Tower? This building?" "Among others," I replied. "I also own the Harrison Center where your main offices are located, the Riverside Complex where Marcus and Sophia live, and the waterfront towers where Patricia's spa is located." The implications of that revelation began to sink in around the room. My family, the people who had been dismissing my success for years, were essentially my tenants. They lived and worked in buildings that I owned. The security guard, apparently realizing that he was witnessing something extraordinary, cleared his throat politely. "Ma'am, should I escort anyone from the building or is everything resolved?" I looked around the silent ballroom at the 200 guests who had just witnessed the most dramatic reversal of expectations any of them had probably ever seen, then back at my family's stunned faces. "Actually," I said, turning to the security guard with a smile, "I think we're fine. But could you please ask the building manager to come up here? I'd like to discuss some policy changes with the family." "Of course, ma'am. Right away." As the security guard walked away, the silence in the ballroom gradually gave way to whispered conversations and the soft sound of people pulling out their phones, probably to verify what they had just heard or to share the story with people who hadn't been fortunate enough to witness it firsthand. Dad sat down heavily in his chair, his earlier confidence completely deflated. "Natalie, I don't understand. Why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us think that I was a failure?" I finished gently. "Because every time I tried to talk about my investments, you cut me off to explain why real estate required serious capital and professional connections. When I mentioned buying my first property, you told me I was wasting my inheritance. When I talked about expanding my portfolio, you said I was in over my head." I pulled out another document from my purse, the building management report that showed the monthly revenue from all my properties. After a while, I decided to let my results speak for themselves. The building manager, a distinguished woman in her 50s, approached our table with the kind of deference that successful property owners always received. Miss Castellano, you wanted to see me? Yes, Sandra. I wanted to introduce you to my family. They're tenants in several of our buildings, and I think it's important that they understand our building policies and rental agreements. Sandra smiled professionally. Of course. Is there anything specific you'd like me to review with them? Just the standard lease terms and our policy on events like this. Also, please make sure they have my direct contact information in case they need anything. As Sandra began explaining the building's policies to my visibly stunned family, I noticed that conversations throughout the ballroom had resumed, but with a decidedly different energy. People were approaching our table, introducing themselves and asking about investment opportunities. Mrs. Wellington from the City Planning Commission extended her hand with obvious respect. Miss Castellano, I had no idea you were the investor behind the downtown revitalization projects. Your work has transformed entire neighborhoods. Dr. Morrison from the Medical Center Board was right behind her. The medical plaza you developed has been absolutely transformational for our practice. We'd love to discuss expanding our lease. But the conversation that mattered most came when Dad pulled me aside as the evening was winding down. Natalie, he said quietly, his voice carrying none of the authority that had dominated the earlier part of the evening, I owe you an apology. More than an apology. I've been completely wrong about what you've accomplished. I know, I replied, giving him a hug that was long overdue. But maybe now we can start over. As equals. Equals. Dad looked around the elegant ballroom, my ballroom in the building that I owned. Sweetheart, I think you might be a little ahead of your old man at this point. Marcus joined us, his earlier arrogance replaced by something that looked like genuine respect. Natalie, I have to ask, would you consider letting me work with you? Because what you've built is exactly what I've been trying to learn how to do. Of course, I said, pulling out my business card. But you should know that my junior analysts start at entry-level positions, regardless of their last name. Marcus took the card with obvious relief. That sounds perfect. I think I have a lot to learn. As the celebration wound down and guests began to leave, many of them stopped to thank me for hosting such a memorable evening in such a beautiful venue. Several business cards were exchanged and I found myself with 3 new potential investment opportunities. But the moment that mattered most came when Dad stood up to make a final toast. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, his voice carrying across the ballroom one last time, I need to make a correction to something I said earlier tonight. The room quieted, all attention focused on the man who had dominated the evening until his daughter had quietly demonstrated that success comes in many forms. I said that Natalie had disappointed me with her lack of direction and success. Dad continued, his voice strong despite the emotion I could see in his eyes. I was wrong. She hasn't disappointed me, she's amazed me. While I've been building a business, she's been building an empire. He raised his glass toward me, his expression carrying both pride and a humility I'd never seen from him before. To Natalie Castellano, property mogul, and the daughter who taught her father that sometimes the student becomes the teacher. The applause that followed was genuine and enthusiastic. And as I stood to acknowledge it, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong about your potential. Sometimes it's showing them that love and respect can transform any relationship, even when it takes owning the building to get their attention. The next morning, 3 major developers called to discuss partnership opportunities. Dad helped me schedule the meetings. The text from my father came at 10:23 a.m. on a Monday, family meeting Sunday at noon. Important news about Grandma's estate. Everyone must attend. I was in my office at Sterling Consulting, reviewing a client's portfolio restructuring when my phone buzzed again. This time my sister Melissa. Did you get Dad's text? This is finally happening. We're going to be rich. I stared at both messages, a familiar knot forming in my stomach. My grandmother had passed away 6 months ago at 93. The funeral had been elaborate. Full Catholic Mass, reception at the country club, enough flowers to fill a greenhouse. Dad had handled everything, repeatedly mentioning how expensive it all was. I'd offered to help with costs. He'd waved me off. Don't worry, Natalie. There's plenty of money. Mom was very comfortable. That was February. It was now August and apparently the estate was finally settled. My office phone rang. Unknown number but local area code. Natalie Chin. Ms. Chin? This is Richard Morrison from Morrison Caldwell and Associates. I'm the trustee executor for the estate of Catherine Chin. Do you have a moment to speak privately? My grandmother's trust attorney. The knot in my stomach tightened. Of course. Let me close my door. I apologize for the delay in contacting you, Richard said. The estate settlement took longer than anticipated due to some complications. I wanted to reach out before your father convenes any family meetings. What complications? Perhaps it's better if we meet in person. Are you available this afternoon? Say 3 p.m. I'll be there. Morrison, Caldwell and Associates occupied the top floor of the Wells building downtown. Old money, old establishment, the kind of law firm that had handled wealthy families' affairs for generations. Richard Morrison was exactly what I expected. Silver hair, bespoke suit, an office that screamed quiet competence. He stood when I entered, shaking my hand with genuine warmth. Miss Chin, thank you for coming on such short notice. He opened a thick folder on his desk. Let me start by saying your grandmother was an extraordinary woman. Sharp as a tack right to the end. She worked with our firm for 42 years. She was always very organized, I agreed. Indeed. Which brings me to why I called you. He slid a document across the desk. This is the Catherine Chin Irrevocable Trust, established in 1995 and amended multiple times. The final amendment was made 8 months before her death. I scanned the document. Legal language, dense paragraphs, multiple schedules attached. The trust assets total approximately $8.7 million, Richard continued. Your grandmother accumulated considerable wealth through shrewd investing and frugal living. $8.7 million. My mind reeled. Grandma had lived in a modest house, drove a 15-year-old Buick clipped coupons. I'd had no idea. Your father, Richard said carefully, has been under the impression that he is the primary beneficiary of this trust. He's been in contact with our office multiple times over the past 6 months, inquiring about distributions, asking about access to funds. And he's not the primary beneficiary. You are. The office seemed to tilt slightly. I'm sorry, what? Richard turned the document to a flagged page. Per the final amendment executed last October, you, Natalie Marie Chin, are designated as the sole primary beneficiary of the trust. 100% of assets transfer to you. I read the words 3 times. They didn't change. Your father, your sister, and your uncle are listed as contingent beneficiaries only. Since you didn't predecease your grandmother, they inherit nothing from the trust itself. Nothing. There are small specific bequests outside the trust. Your father receives your grandmother's car and $25,000. Your sister receives jewelry valued at approximately $8,000. Your uncle receives the house and $25,000. But the liquid assets, the investment accounts, the cash, the portfolio, all of that goes to you. My hands were shaking. Why? Richard pulled out another document, a letter in my grandmother's handwriting. She left this for you. I took the letter with trembling fingers. My dearest Natalie, if you're reading this, I've passed on and Richard has told you about the trust. I imagine you're shocked. Let me explain. I made you the primary beneficiary because you're the only one in this family who doesn't need the money. You worked your way through college. You built your career through merit. You live within your means. You've never asked me for a penny. Your father and sister have been asking me for money for years. Loans they never repaid. Investments in failed ventures. Emergencies that were really luxury purchases. I gave them money because they're family. But I watched them waste every dollar. They think I'm senile. They don't notice when they talk about my money like it's already theirs. Your sister once told her friend, right in front of me, that she was waiting for the old lady to finally die so we can access the real money. I heard that. I heard a lot of things they thought I was too old to understand. So I changed my will. I put everything in trust for you because I know you'll use it wisely. Your father will be angry. He's been planning how to spend his inheritance for a decade. Let him be angry. You owe him nothing. You were the grandchild who visited because you wanted to, not because you wanted something. Thank you for that, sweetheart. All my love, Grandma. I read it twice, tears blurring the words. She loved you very much, Richard said quietly. The trust is ironclad. Your father has no legal recourse to contest it. He doesn't know, I said. He thinks he's inheriting. which is why I wanted to brief you first. Natalie, I need to ask, does your family have access to any of your financial information? Bank accounts, credit cards? The question seemed random. No. Why? Richard pulled out another file. Because 3 weeks ago your father attempted to open a line of credit using the trust as collateral. He claimed to be the trustee and attempted to authorize a $500,000 advance against the estate. My blood ran cold. He tried to borrow against Grandma's money? He did. The bank contacted us for verification and we informed them he had no authority. They denied the application. But Natalie, he's been making financial commitments based on money he thinks is coming. What kind of commitments? He put a deposit on a beach house in Florida. $200,000 financed with a bridge loan he expects to pay off with his inheritance. He also ordered a boat, $180,000 also financed. And your sister leased a Mercedes last month. I closed my eyes. They've already spent the money. They've committed to spending it, yes. Which means when they discover the truth, there will be significant financial crisis on top of emotional reaction. When are you planning to tell them? I'm not, Richard said. You are. This is your inheritance. Your grandmother wanted you to control how and when this information is shared. Sunday arrived too quickly. I sat in my car outside my parents' house for 15 minutes, gathering courage. Through the window I could see movement inside. Dad's booming laugh. Melissa's high-pitched excitement. My aunt and uncle, cousins I barely knew, all gathered for the big announcement. I walked in to find champagne already flowing. Real champagne, expensive bottles. Natalie. Finally. Dad grabbed me in a hug that smelled of cologne and alcohol. Today's a celebration. The living room was full. Mom, Melissa, Uncle Tom, Aunt Carol, 3 cousins. Everyone dressed nicely, anticipating good news. Now that everyone's here, Dad announced, standing in front of the fireplace, I want to share wonderful news. Mom's estate has finally been settled, and as I expected, she left us very comfortable. How much? Melissa asked eagerly. The attorney said approximately $8.7 million in liquid assets, plus the house and personal property. Gasps around the room. My cousin Sarah actually squealed. $8 million, Uncle Tom repeated. Split how many ways? 3 primary beneficiaries, Dad said confidently. Myself, Natalie, and Tom. So roughly $2.9 million each. Of course, there are some specific bequests. Melissa gets Mom's jewelry. But the bulk is split 3 ways. He looked at me. Natalie, I know you'll want to be smart about this. We should meet with a financial advisor. Dad, I interrupted. That's not correct. He blinked. What's not correct? The distribution. The beneficiaries. None of that is correct. Natalie, I've spoken with the attorney multiple times. When did you last speak with Richard Morrison? Richard? I haven't spoken to him directly. I've been communicating with the paralegal. She didn't tell you the actual distribution. Or more likely, you assumed and she didn't correct you. The room went silent. Melissa set down her champagne. Nat, what are you talking about? I pulled out the trust documents. Grandma established an irrevocable trust in 1995. She amended it multiple times, most recently 8 months before her death. I met with Richard Morrison on Monday. I'm the sole primary beneficiary. Dad's face turned red. You're one of 3 primary beneficiaries. No, Dad. I'm the only one. The trust leaves 100% of the liquid assets to me. $8.7 million. All of it. The silence was absolute. Melissa laughed nervously. That's insane. Grandma wouldn't cut out her own son. She didn't cut him out. He gets the car and $25,000. Uncle Tom gets the house and $25,000. Melissa, you get her jewelry. But the money, all of it, comes to me. That's impossible. Dad's voice rose. She wouldn't do that. We had conversations. She promised nothing, I said quietly. You assumed. Uncle Tom found his voice. We'll contest it. That trust was made when Mom was elderly, probably not of sound mind. She was completely sound, I said. Richard has medical documentation confirming her mental competence at every amendment. The trust is ironclad. Dad grabbed the documents from my hands, scanning desperately. His face went from red to pale. This can't be right, he whispered. The beach house. I put down $200,000. The bridge loan. I have to pay it back within 60 days or you lose the deposit and still owe the loan, I finished. Yes. Richard told me you've been making financial commitments based on money you don't have. Melissa stood abruptly. The Mercedes. I just leased. Oh my God. I can't afford the payments on my salary. I thought. You thought you were about to be rich, I said. So you spent money you didn't have yet. This is your fault. Dad pointed at me, his hand shaking. You poisoned her against us. You manipulated her. I visited her, I said calmly. I spent time with her because I loved her. Not because I wanted her money. Bullshit. Melissa's voice was shrill. You were playing the long game. Waiting for her to die so you could take everything. I pulled out Grandma's letter. She left this explaining exactly why she made this decision. I don't want to hear her excuses. Dad shouted. She didn't betray you, I said. She just stopped enabling you. Uncle Tom stepped forward. Natalie, be reasonable. That's a lot of money for one person. Surely you can share. Share what? Money I didn't earn? That you deserve a portion because you're related to her. Yes. Melissa cried. We're family. Family shares. Family respects each other, I countered. Family doesn't talk about Grandma like she's a bank account with a pulse. He heard you say that, Melissa. 2 years ago at Christmas. You told your friend you were waiting for the old lady to finally die. She heard you. Melissa's face went white. I didn't, that was. You meant it. And she knew it. That's why she changed the trust. Dad sank into a chair, face in his hands. What am I supposed to do? The beach house, the boat, the bridge loan. I'm financially ruined. You're financially overextended, I corrected. Because you spent money you didn't have. That's not my problem. Not your problem. I'm your father. You let yourself lose everything the moment you counted money that wasn't yours. Mom spoke up quietly. Natalie, honey. Your father made mistakes, but he's still your father. Surely you can share some of the money. He needs to face the consequences of his choices, I said. This money is mine to manage as I see fit. And I'm not bailing out people who've been planning my grandmother's funeral like it was a lottery win. You cold-hearted bitch, Melissa spat. I hope that money makes you happy because you'll have no one. We're done. This family is done. Good, I said simply. Because this stopped feeling like family a long time ago. I walked to the door. For what it's worth, Grandma left instructions. Dad gets $25,000 in the car. Melissa, the jewelry is worth about $8,000. Uncle Tom, the house is fully paid off. That's it. Uncle Tom asked. $25,000 from an $8.7 million estate? That's what Grandma decided you deserved, I said. I left them there, their champagne going flat, their celebration turned to ashes. 2 weeks later, Dad showed up at my office. Security called up. Miss Chin? There's a Richard Chin in the lobby. He doesn't have an appointment. He says it's an emergency. I sighed. Send him up. Dad looked terrible. Unshaven, rumpled suit, exhausted. Thank you for seeing me, he said. You threatened to make a scene. That's not earning goodwill. I'm desperate. He sank into the chair. The bridge loan is due in 2 weeks. If I can't pay, I lose the deposit and still owe $200,000. The bank is threatening foreclosure. Your mother and I could be homeless. You own your house outright. How are they foreclosing? His face flushed. I took out a home equity loan. To cover the boat deposit. I thought I'd pay it off with the inheritance. How much do you owe? $320,000. I stared at him. You've been retired 3 years. You have no income except Social Security. How did any bank approve that? I may have exaggerated our financial situation. You committed fraud. Please. Tears welled in his eyes. I'm begging you. Just enough to cover the loans. I'll pay you back, I'll sell the house, whatever you want. I thought about Grandma's letter. About her watching them treat her like a bank account for years. No, I said. No. I'm not giving you money to bail you out. Grandma left you $25,000. Use that. $25,000 doesn't even make a dent. Then sell the car she left you. Declare bankruptcy if you have to. But I'm not funding your mistakes. Dad's face hardened. Fine. Don't help. But don't expect to be part of this family anymore. You chose money over us. I chose to honor Grandma's wishes, I said. You chose to spend money that wasn't yours. We both made our choices. He left without another word. 3 months later, Dad declared bankruptcy and lost his home. He and Mom moved into a small apartment. Melissa defaulted on the Mercedes lease and got her first full-time job in 5 years because she had no choice. Uncle Tom sold Grandma's house and retired in Arizona. And I invested the $8.7 million exactly as Grandma would have wanted. I also established a scholarship fund in her name for first-generation college students. $100,000 annually. The family stopped speaking to me entirely. No calls, no texts, no holiday invitations. But I received a letter from a scholarship recipient, an 18-year-old girl named Maria, first in her family to attend college. She thanked me for making her education possible. I framed that letter and hung it in my office. Grandma had been right. The money was better spent building something beautiful than bailing out people who refused to build anything for themselves. Grandma's money is for all of us, Dad had announced. He was wrong. It was for me. Because I was the only one who'd earned it by loving her instead of her money.